Code Ninja Security Advisory initiated. Listen up, everyone, because today we're issuing a critical briefing on CVE 2026-0257. This is a massive authentication bypass vulnerability, hitting Palo Alto Network's Pan-OS Global Protect portals and gateways right where it hurts. If you're defending an enterprise perimeter today, you need to pay close attention, because honestly, the perimeter you're trusting has fundamentally failed. We aren't talking about some theoretical lab bug here. We are looking at a fully weaponized, active crisis where adversaries are completely bypassing authentication to drop directly onto internal networks. Let's dive into this explainer and break down exactly what's happening.
To put it bluntly, your perimeter is compromised. This vulnerability allows totally unauthenticated remote attackers to literally forge session cookies. And with those forged cookies, they just establish unauthorized VPN connections. No joke, they don't need to steal a password, they don't need to phish your multi-factor authentication, none of that. By exploiting this flaw, your gateway instantly treats them as authenticated users, dropping them right onto your internal enterprise network. And because this attack vector is network-based with super low complexity, any reachable portal in a vulnerable configuration can be targeted directly over the open internet.
And this whole situation brilliantly illustrates just how fast a theoretical threat morphs into a practical, real-world crisis. Just take a look at this timeline. Palo Alto Networks disclosed the vulnerability on May 13th. Fast forward a mere 4 days to May 17th, and Rapid7 is already observing active, in-the-wild exploitation. Threat actors were reverse engineering the mechanics and weaponizing it almost immediately. By May 29th, things had escalated so drastically that CISA slapped it onto their known exploited vulnerabilities catalog, triggering a highly strict June 1st federal remediation deadline. The window between disclosure and active attack was, well, practically non-existent.
Now, I want you to notice that number on the screen, 7.8. That's the CVSS version 4.0 base score, classifying it as a high-severity issue. But listen, do not let that 7.8 lull you into a false sense of security. The absolute critical metric here is the exploit maturity, which Palo Alto actively updated to attacked, meaning this isn't some proof of concept sitting in a researcher's sandbox. The threat vector is real, it's immediate, and attackers are using it to breach corporate networks as we speak.
So what's our objective for this briefing? Well, we practice coordinated vulnerability disclosure because, quite frankly, transparency forces action. Our primary goal today is to equip you with the exact hard intelligence you need to force immediate network mitigation and mandate vendor patching. We've got to secure the compromised perimeter before adversaries can exploit the gap. You need the facts right now to justify those emergency middle-of-the-night maintenance windows to your business leaders.
Okay, before we jump into the technical teardown, let's pause the intelligence feed for just a second. I need to establish a secure, verified communication link with every operative watching this briefing. Are you receiving this intel loud and clear?
To maintain our comms protocol moving forward, hitting subscribe on @cybertech79 is literally a security necessity. We push out real-time, actionable intelligence, and you really need those notifications enabled so you don't miss the next zero-day alert. Also, I need you to drop a like on this explainer right now. Consider that your formal acknowledgement, an ACK, that you've received this critical advisory and you're ready to proceed.
Acknowledgement received. Let's move into Section 1, the protocol. We're doing a deep dive into the vulnerability and its blast radius.
So we're going to unpack exactly how this exploit manages to completely bypass the VPN gateway without tripping any standard credential alarms. It all starts with something called Authentication override cookies. By definition, this is just a convenience feature, right? It's designed to preserve session state so your legitimate users don't have to deal with annoying repeated login prompts every time their connection blips. A user authenticates once, the gateway hands them a cookie, and the user presents that cookie later instead of re-entering credentials. Simple. But, as you're about to see, this nice little convenience feature just became a critical security boundary failure.
Let's compare normal behavior against the exploited state. Under normal conditions, the gateway properly validates authenticated user sessions. But under exploitation, we run into a specific fatal flaw, tracked as CVE-2026-0257. Essentially, there's a missing signature validation in the GP-SVC binary. When an HTTP post request comes in containing a portal user auth cookie, the system decrypts it using a private key, which sounds fine, but it completely fails to validate the cryptographic signature for authenticity. Because it skips that vital signature check, the gateway just goes ahead and accepts mathematically forged cookies as absolute, unquestionable proof of identity.
However, your specific blast radius depends on 3 very distinct conditions. You are only exposed if 1. You have a global protect portal or gateway configured, 2, you have those authentication override cookies explicitly enabled. And 3, and honestly this is the deadly one, the certificate used to encrypt those cookies is being reused and shared with your public-facing HTTPS services. If you share that certificate, a remote attacker can just casually harvest the public key from the certificate chain, which gives them everything they need to forge the override cookie perfectly.
If your setup matches those conditions, you need to check your PAN-OS version immediately. The vulnerable branches are 12.1, 11.2, 11.1, and 10.2. Take a look at the data here to see the exact fixed target releases you need to hit to close this hole. Also, it is absolutely vital to note that Prisma Access is affected too, though the vendor is actively upgrading that, while Panorama and Cloud NGFW thankfully remain safe and unaffected.
When we look at the exposure data, it reveals a pretty alarming industry pattern. Just look at the industrial sector sitting there making up 25.3% of exposed assets. Now, this sector relies heavily on distributed remote access setups for field staff and manufacturing plants. Often, we're talking about legacy deployments that have just been sitting there, leaving massive unmonitored edge risks. Configuration choices made years ago, like enabling those override cookies for convenience, tend to persist, leaving critical infrastructure highly exposed to some very dangerous threat vectors today.
And this brilliantly illustrates the real underlying danger, which is perfectly captured in this quote from the source analysis. The VPN session is not the final objective, it is the passport. You see, once that unauthorized VPN session is established, it's just a staging ground. Attackers use this passport to test which downstream Windows estates, Active Directory servers, or legacy file shares will accept their presence as proof of legitimacy. It is literally the launchpad for ransomware and lateral data theft. So how do we stop them at the gate? Let's move to Section 2, the patch. It's time to execute the mitigation protocol.
Let's pivot forcefully to some actionable intelligence. Here is your immediate remediation protocol, right in sequence. Step 1, if you cannot patch this very second, go into your portal and gateway settings and completely disable authentication override. Boom, this breaks the exploit vector instantly. Step 2, if you absolutely must use override cookies, you have to generate a dedicated, non-shared certificate strictly for their encryption. Do not reuse your portal certificate. This isolates the cryptography and prevents that public key harvesting we talked about. Finally, Step 3, deploy the official PAN-OS fixed release for your specific branch as soon as humanly possible.
Now listen up, because here's a massive warning for all you system administrators executing Step 3. Once you apply that firmware upgrade, the firewall is going to securely regenerate the cookies using a totally new method. Because of this, a mandatory one-time re-authentication will be required for every single one of your Global Protect users. You are going to get help desk tickets for sure, so communicate this to your staff beforehand so they know it's expected behavior and not the network crashing.
Look, because attackers have been exploiting this actively since mid-May, you cannot just patch and forget. You have to execute threat hunting. You need to actively hunt for anomalous sessions. Look for HTTP post requests targeting /SSL-VPN/login.tsp. Scour your system logs for invalid portal-user auth cookie signatures. Keep an eye out for unexpected local admin account usage. And most importantly, identify any VPN IPs assigned right after a cookie authentication from unfamiliar or totally untrusted geographic locations. Those are your indicators that an adversary has already bypassed your perimeter.
All right, Section 3, the ethics, coordinated vulnerability disclosure. Before we wrap this up, let's talk about why we analyze these threats so publicly. It really comes down to the ethics of coordinated vulnerability disclosure and why practicing it is absolutely essential for our collective defense. We justify this kind of disclosure because, at the end of the day, transparency forces fixes. As the analysis notes, users need to know to protect their systems. The perimeter didn't disappear. It moved into cookies and certificates. We've spent years talking about the perimeter dissolving, but honestly, it just shifted. Every cookie, every certificate, every session token at that edge is now a critical identity plane. Organizations have got to understand that this edge infrastructure is incredibly fragile, and keeping vulnerabilities like this hidden, that only benefits the adversaries.
And that brings us to the end of today's advisory. So I'll leave you with this. Has your organization audited its VPN trust boundaries recently, or are you still blindly trusting the tunnel itself as proof of identity? Well, it's time to find out. Execute the mitigation protocol, check your logs, and patch your systems. Until next time, stay secure.